And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Tony Rathman, founder of Entity Voices Paranormal Investigation, and he is also currently developing Staticom, the newest method of spirit communication, which we're going to learn about and more. Tony, thanks for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you for having me on, Jeff. Looking forward to talking about Staticom and let you know what we're working on.
All right, well, let's just jump right into it. First of all, what is Staticom and how is it different from the spirit boxes that are out there?
Okay. Good question. What a spirit box does, and it was, originally called the Frank's box because it was developed by Frank Sumption. It was a device that would scan radio stations, and you could adjust the speed at which it would scan. It would go forward, scanning upwards. It would go in reverse. And then you'd ask question after question, and you would hopefully get a response. Now, my wife and I have built spirit boxes for about 12 years. The reason we don't build them anymore is because of a method known as direct radio voice. This was a method that existed even prior to the spirit box being invented. And there are 4 people that have developed what we call Staticom today, and it developed from direct radio voice. Ron Yacovetti and Lourdes Gonzalez literally took years, went back and researched all of the ITC pioneers. What did they do? What were they using? How was it working? And anybody who knows anything about spirit boxes, can you get answers that may have more than one word or a couple of words? Yes, you can, but it's not a continual occurrence. So they looked up what was called direct radio voice, which used a radio also, but sat on a vacant frequency, white noise basically, rather than scanning up and down the dial. They brought this method back, brought it into the 21st century, and started using it to see if they could get the results that Frederick Jurgensen got, who was the person who invented it, and then a gentleman named Marcello Bacci, who used direct radio voice for about 40 years, let the public come in and get answers to their own questions from the other side. Direct radio voice was producing some good results. When my wife and I went out to New Jersey to do a 4-mansion tour in 4 days, one a day, with Ron and Lourdes, we saw them using this method. And being spirit box builders, we were curious, how are you getting these responses? The responses are clear, they're understandable, and they're full sentences. So he explained what DRV was. We were aware of DRV, but we had never heard anything producing speech like that. And so after he explained what it was, how it was working, I said, hey, can we join you on developing this? And what we did then was we realized through a couple different instances that the whole aspect of the radio, a spirit box was developed so that the theory was that spirits would take the fragments of radio that would be spit out when it's spinning across the dial and turn those into their own sentence. Well, Ron and Lourdes did a test 30 feet underground in a zinc mine, and there was no radio waves. So anybody who had brought a spirit box got nothing because there was no signal. Signal can't penetrate ground like that. Even people who had cell phones lost signal when they were down in the mine because even cell phone signals can't penetrate ground. But they were using DRV at that time, and they still got voice response.
Let me stop you for 1 second. What is DRV?
Direct radio voice.
Okay. So it sounds like to me they used to just scan through stations, but now they're putting it on an empty station of static.
Well, spirit boxes scan radio.
Right.
Direct radio voice would sit on a vacant frequency.
But even though it's on a vacant frequency, if you're far underground, you shouldn't even be able to pick up the vacant frequency either, right?
Correct. Being underground was basically the equivalent of putting a Faraday cage over it. Yes.
Okay. You're putting it on this vacant frequency of just hearing static.
Correct.
That's how you got the name Staticom, I guess.
Well, I'll get to that, but you're absolutely correct.
Right.
Because they were the only piece of equipment to still get voices, I and my wife were doing a live presentation, and I was going to grab the world band radio to hook it up and realized I had a sleep machine in my bag. On that sleep machine was a setting that said white noise. So I thought, live audience or not, I'm going to try this. So I plugged in the sleep machine, turned it to white noise, asked a question, got an answer. The funny part was, though, is that it wasn't live white noise. It was a 3-second recorded loop. So two things happened. Just like an EVP, where their voice gets recorded onto the recorder, on the sleep machine, their voice got recorded onto the white noise recording of white noise. But it was only a 3-second loop. So every 3 seconds, the answer they gave me repeated. That's how I knew it was a 3-second loop. So then after that, went back to our team. I said, Ron, Lourdes, we don't need a radio. And that was one of the biggest low-hanging pieces of fruit for scientists, for skeptics. You're picking up stray radio wave. You're using a radio. It's made to transmit communication. Even if your answer sounds like an answer to your question, it's stray radio wave. So we replaced the radio with a white noise generator. Has no ability to pick up radio, has no ability to pick up walkie-talkie, any other satellite, any other signal. So that's literally taken it off the table from a standpoint of skepticism, because it can't do that. So we now replaced it with a white noise generator, changed the name from direct radio voice to Staticom, because all we're using is live static, live white, broadband white noise, and getting full communication from it.
So you're playing the white noise and you're recording, I guess, at the same time. And then you go back and listen to the recordings. And that's how you determine what was said?
Well, everything runs live. So when you get the method to operate and you ask a question, their answer comes right back to you, and it's audible. Oh. It's not like a spirit box where you're fighting static, you're fighting all the other elements. It's audible. So the reason we believe that works is that there's a theory of what's called stochastic resonance, and it's taking white noise to amplify a signal that cannot be detected. It's used in all sorts of medical equipment they make bracelets that will send signals through the body to help heal it, and it's based off of that concept of amplifying the signal. So we took that scientific principle and we applied it where when the spirits speak, we can't hear them. The human body is limited in sight, it is limited in hearing, and it's outside of our range. So what the white noise level does is, because it's every sound the human hear, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, when the spirit speaks, it overlaps some of those frequencies. And then that elevates their voice up. Then we go through and we cut off the white noise base layer, leaving only their voice.
In like sound engineering terms, it sounds like that you're using kind of like a limiter and a compressor or a gate.
There is all sorts of filtration within the system, and those all run live. So the other thing that we did was, which is completely unique to ITC, or instrumental transcommunication, which is what this method is called, is that we slowed down. Well, we use broadband white noise only. We slow down broadband white noise in real time. Many of the ITC pioneers said the spirits will speak so fast, it's really hard to understand what they're saying. Not only is it hard to understand, but it's faster than any human vocal tract could even speak it. So we slowed live white noise down in real time. And we also filter in real time, which is what people do when they do EVP. They'll record and review, then they'll come back, they'll clean it up, they may slow it down, they may speed it up. All of that happens for us in real time. And then we get an audible, clear, intelligent voice answering the question we asked.
Is there a time delay in doing all this audio processing? I know no time delay. Wow.
Believe it or not, there is not. Now, we've had to upgrade systems multiple times. I mean, we're running computers that are top of the line processors, max amount of RAM, as many cores as we could get our hands on. The older computers we were using, we maxed them out, and that became a problem. It caused skipping. It caused all sorts of understanding of what was being said. But yes, we use top of the line computers to allow the processing to happen.
What is the frequency that a spirit speaks at that you're isolating?
That's a great question, and one we've been asked many times. There isn't a specific frequency. Now, some of the ITC pioneers said, use this hertz, or spirits can speak all over the board. Even the same spirit in between sentences can change frequencies. So that is why we use every sound the human ear can hear from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, so we don't miss any of that conversation.
Wow. I think you've piqued all of our interest. Let's listen to one, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more about it.
So what I'm about to play, and I mentioned a gentleman named Marcello Bacci, who had literally used DRV to communicate with spirits for like 40 years. He was tested by scientists. Scientists could not debunk what was occurring. It's funny because he actually comes up and is mentioned in this clip. So let me play this. Here we go.
Spirits, can you please try to communicate with us through this device? Who's watching?
Bacci.
That was clear. Do you understand the rumbling?
Bacci, are you keeping track of what we're doing?
Marcello, can you see us?
Yes.
Thank you. Marcello, you started this method. It's working. Can you please try to communicate with us?
So there you go.
Wow, that was amazing.
Yeah, like I said, it's real-time communication. The longest communication we've ever had lasted about 7.5, 8 minutes, and it's two-way communication. You can ask a question, get an answer, respond to that answer, and keep that communication going. This was an interesting one because we never expected to actually hear from someone claiming to be Marcello Bacci, but we did. And then my wife said, "This is your method. Can you communicate with us?" He said, "I'd say glad to meet you." And the funniest thing about that is not only did he say it, and his native American language was not English, but he's speaking English, yet you can hear sort of an accent or a territorial dialect in his English speech.
A lot of my guests talk about that our family members, our guides, our angels are around us all the time. So have you ever tried just turning it on in your house and seeing if anybody's with you?
We turn it on in the house probably 6, 7 times a week. We are constantly using it. We use it in our home. We use it in haunted locations. It's traveled all over the US. We do that on a regular basis. The interesting part is that you can turn it on and you can listen to what they're saying. You don't even have to ask anything. It's like a spiritual eavesdrop where you send audio in where you can hear what they're talking about. There's times we've turned it on and they're speaking a different language. And I'm like, "What language are you speaking? That's not English." And they responded, "Turkish." So then we took it to somebody who speaks Turkish and said, "Yeah, they're speaking Turkish." And I said, "Hey, can you speak English? I only speak English," where my wife can speak Japanese, Tagalog, English, which helps. But none of us spoke Turkish, and then they responded back and said, "Yeah, we'll speak in English."
So who were those people speaking?
Interesting that you bring that up. We can actually get names. Like, they will call me by my first and last name, and then I'll turn around and say, "Okay, who am I speaking to?" In fact, let me play a clip that shows exactly what I'm talking about. And here's a clip showing exactly what you were just asking. Can you say Tony? Did you just say Rathman? Yep. So you know who I am. Can I know who you are? Yes, sir. Thank you. Who am I speaking to? So there you have it.
Now, I'm not complaining, and I think you're doing an amazing job. But do you think you can get this to the point where you can even clean up the audio any even more?
Well, we work on that all the time, but you got to remember, we are dealing with what is considered to be the paranormal. So people always ask us, well, who's speaking? Where do these voices originate? We don't have those answers. The reason we don't have those answers is because we don't know the variables involved from where they're coming from. It's kind of like the analogy of a football player who's a receiver, and he runs out in the field, he turns around, he looks up, and the ball's coming towards him. He grabs it, runs with it. We're that receiver who grabs it, runs with it, but where it came from, who threw it, we don't know that information. So that's about the best analogy I can give.
Well, what are your theories on where these people are when you're talking to them?
That is another excellent question. We believe, and this is one of the most difficult parts about working on a project in the paranormal, because we fight most of the time two major institutions. The first one being science. Materialistic science says consciousness lives in the brain. When the brain dies and the body dies, consciousness dies. We don't believe that to be true. We believe consciousness is the fundamental block of life, and it continues on. The other one we fight on a regular basis is religion. Oh, I don't know who you're talking to, but those are demons. No, they're not. We don't believe they are. But where those voices are coming from, we believe from a universal consciousness, meaning that consciousness is part of each individual. It gets separated from universal consciousness. Then all knowledge that consciousness picks up gets returned to universal consciousness when the body dies. And that information then becomes part of universal consciousness. So therefore, when I ask a question to spirits, what am I holding in my hand? How do they know what I'm holding in my hand? They don't have human eyes. They don't have human ears. They don't have human senses. And if spirits could just look and say, oh, he's holding glasses, then why did the human body take thousands of years to evolve with our sight? You know, that doesn't make any sense. So we think they're picking up that information from the fact that I'm thinking I'm holding glasses, which then goes back to universal consciousness, and they can just pull it and say, you're holding glasses.
Do you have a video of this?
I do. We do, but I don't have it queued. I don't have that one queued up.
All right.
And to find it could take a while.
It sounds like to me that doing this is not dangerous.
We've been doing it for 14 years. And although we've also done paranormal investigations for 14 years, we have brought home spirits from paranormal investigations. We have never had any concerns with the communication. And we run Staticom in our house weekly, multiple times a week.
You're saying that you brought spirits home with you.
From investigations, yes.
A lot of people say if you bring us, you open up a portal and you bring a spirit in your house, all kinds of bad things can happen. But it sounds like to me that's not happening with you.
We have had it happen.
Oh.
We've had it mess with our children. and we've had to communicate. We've done investigations where we've actually had to have the house exorcised. So does negativity, does darkness, does the use the word, but more on the demonic side exist? Yes, it does. But is it a everyday occurrence like Hollywood and television, YouTube like to portray it as? No, it's not. After 14 years, I would say we've run into 2 cases that I would consider on the dark side. Would I say it was demonic? I'd have a hard time saying that. But like I said, did the house need to be exercised? Yeah, it did.
Well, what was happening that made you want the house to get exercised?
We ran spirit communication. The things that were said were just off the chart, vulgar, disgusting. We had objects moving. We had apparition-like silhouettes fall from the ceiling and float across the room. It was crazy. But the thing that really tipped us off was the communication, what they were saying, and just how vicious it was. That's why we called in help to have the house exercised.
Can you show us some more videos? Do you have anything else queued up?
Yeah, I do. So as I was speaking before, I was talking about the fact that if spirits are energy, they don't have human ears. They don't have human eyes. They don't have the 5 senses that humans were placed on Earth to use to figure out what's going on around them. So what I wanted to know was, when I ask these questions, how do they hear what I'm saying? They don't have human ears. I'm creating vocal sound waves, which filter the environment. And then human ears have follicles in them, which pick up the vibrations. Those vibrations are in the brain are turned to sound. If a spirit doesn't have that, and I'm speaking, how do they hear me speak? That's the question I wanted to know. What I'm going to play is my question and their answer. And here is that answer. How do you hear me speak? So there's your answer right there. They are not hearing me speak. They are not listening with ears. Their answer was energy of the mind. That's the thing. Now, anyone who's been involved in the paranormal for a number of years knows that a common occurrence when doing EVP is that the answer will show up on the recorder before you even finish asking the question. That answer absolutely defines how that occurs.
If we get back to the evil spirits out there, to me that means that these beings are also accessing this universal consciousness, just like good beings could, but they're using it in their own, in a negative way. Like, it kind of reminds me of Star Wars. It's like you can access the Force and use it for good or bad. Does that make sense to you?
That does make sense. The whole theory behind how we believe this works, we integrated into the fact when we got the machine working, because from a scientific level, we wanted to figure out the straightest path to the answers without creating, multiple curves and bends within the theory. And if this happens, this is we wanted a pretty much straight line of how we believe this is occurring. So the concept of analytic idealism is what we adopted, which basically says that consciousness is the core to all life, whether it be life or death. It exists beyond death and survives, and universal consciousness holds all the information for the universe. Is that then accessible by what you're calling the darker side? Could be. Absolutely could be.
Do you notice that whether you have this machine in your house or you take it to a haunted house, the results are different?
There are times where, whether we take it to a haunted location or whether we take it to a group of people that are coming to do what we call TDSI, or the Digital Seance Initiative, which is basically a seance like has been done for the last 1,000 years, minus the person telling everybody what they're receiving or hearing or feeling. Staticom does it for them. So they will ask their questions, Staticom will give them their answers. But what we noticed is the people that are truly interested will get more responses. When it's taken to a haunted location, the spirits that reply might be associated with the location or the land or the building. But we never consider a destination to be haunted based on getting vocal responses alone. It is not enough to determine that they're in the location that you're in, because time and space do not exist for them. They can communicate through the machine from anywhere.
Have you ever asked for information in the future and seen it come true?
There are what we call universal laws. Those universal laws, spirits are bound to. And there's certain information they cannot give that will interrupt, change, or manipulate the life you were put here to do and what you were meant to learn. The reason I know that is because we've asked for the Powerball numbers 1,000 times. They will literally stop talking, say we can't, they'll tell each other stop talking, or they literally will say we can't answer that. That is one example of the universal law. Another example is, my friend so-and-so is going through a hard time. What can he do to change his path? They will not answer information that predicts future change to the path you were set to go through.
I guess they can't help us in any way. Would that be correct?
No. We had a friend who had a health problem and it was becoming severe. And I did ask that question. They did give me an answer. I'm not going to say what the answer was, but when we looked it up, when we figured out what this was, it should help.
Is there any other information that you received that you were able to go out and verify it?
Excellent question. One of the things that people always ask us is, hey, how do you know who you're speaking to? We don't. Could it be something on the dark side? Could we be being deceived on what we're told? Could they be pretending to be something or someone that they're not? Yeah, it's possible. But I can tell you probably about 94% of the time, any information that we were given that we could look up, we could research, and we could verify, 94% of what we were given was absolutely true.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. We were given a name of a location, and nobody knew of that name. Nobody that was associated with this location knew anything about this name, including the historical society that ran this location. The funniest part was this guy kept saying his name, told us who he was. We went to the location. We had never been there before. His name was James Patterson. He had contacted our counterparts, Ron Iacovetti and Lourdes Gonzalez, through their Staticom a week prior to us going to North Carolina to investigate this house. When Ron showed up in North Carolina, he said, does anybody know a James Patterson associated with this house? Nobody knew the name. We went to the house. We set up our equipment. We went upstairs into one of what used to be the bedrooms, was now some sort of military acknowledgement of some of the locals that were in the area. On the wall was a gigantic photo of a military pilot. His name was James Patterson.
Do you have some more examples or video that you can share with us?
I sure do. I have quite a few. Speaking of that house that we were at in the James Patterson, the clip I'm going to play next was actually from this house during the investigation when we were there. Now, just some background history. This house was built on 5,000 acres, way out in the middle of the country. The house was built in 1820, still exists today, but it was nowhere near town. And The fact that it was that remote gives a perfect reasoning to the answer given. But the question asked was, what was your favorite part of this house? What room? We expected like the dining room or the study. That is not the answer we got. The answer we got was this.
What's your favorite part of this house? What room?
So when you look at that in terms of timing and relevance, and timing and relevance is what's determined if an answer is truly answering the question that you asked. That had timing, came right after the question asked. It was relevant to the question asked, and it was intelligent. So intelligent that the answer that they gave wasn't even anything any of us were thinking. We asked what room. He said no comps. Children can play. House has safety because they were out in the middle of nowhere. Horse and buggy at that time, cops would have taken half, 3/4 of a day to get out there. So they weren't showing up every day. House had safety. That's intelligence.
So they're saying basically the entire house is their favorite place.
Correct. It was safe. It was a safe place for the family. It was the same place for the workers. It was the same safe place for the children to go outside and play because no one was around. The other really interesting thing about this to know is that broadband white noise has no vocal data at all. There is no audio, there is no words, there is no sentences. These sentences should not be there. Yet they are, they're intelligent, and they're showing up with timing and relevance.
What are some of the biggest hurdles on working a project like this?
Two of the biggest hurdles are skeptics. If you've never listened to EVPs, people will be like, well, I don't hear what you're hearing. People in the academia world who participate in materialistic science will say white noise is random. You're hearing warbles and artifacts. You're trying to put patterns together. We don't believe that to be true at all. First of all, white noise isn't truly random. It is affected by all sorts of environmental factors. And I'm not putting together warbles and artifacts saying, well, I think they said. When we do this live, there are no words showing up on screen. It's only the audio. And the audience will go, oh my God, I heard this. And everyone else will go, yeah, I heard that too. There is consistency in what's being heard. If autodolia or pareidolia was that much of a factor that would affect us in our daily life. I'd walk into my boss on Monday morning and he'd say, hey, you're fired. And I'm like, oh, a raise, fantastic. That doesn't happen on a regular basis. Hearing warbles and artifacts and getting true speech, which is pattern recognition. So even the idea of recognizing patterns, that's how speech occurs. We recognize the words, the tonality. So that's not a negative or a debunking factor. And when multiple people in the same room hear it and all agree that they heard the same thing, again, that supports what's being said.
Have you ever tried having one of your colleagues hold something in their hand in a completely different location from you and then asking, what is Ron holding?
Funny you say that, because yes, absolutely, we've done that. Cherie and I are in Phoenix. Ron and Lourdes are in New Jersey, so we're across the country. Our other counterparts to Entity Voices Paranormal Evidence, which is our podcast, they're in North Carolina. We were all online. Ron was running Staticom in New Jersey. Chris said, I'm going to write a word on a piece of paper. Didn't even hold it up to the camera. We didn't even know what the word was. Then Ron said in North Carolina Spirits, what word did Ron write on his piece of paper? A couple of seconds went by. They came back. They said zebra. Chris held the picture up to the camera. Sure enough, he wrote zebra.
Wow, that's amazing.
But again, based on like analytic idealism, did they have to travel that distance? Probably not. when Ron said, "What word is Chris holding?" Chris is thinking it. He knows what he wrote. He's thinking it. That goes to universal consciousness. They grab it, reply back what word he wrote.
If you could get this to work, do you think someone could ever use this as a spying application? Like, what does this government have locked up in this warehouse in
Okay,
such
so
and
I'm going
such
to tell you a
location?
story, and I don't like to tell the story because it brings up some negativity and it brings up some fears. But we were working on a cold case with a friend of ours, and she came to us and said, "I need to know. Can you ask these questions for me?" And I said, "Sure." So I asked them, got responses, sent them to her. She was working with various agencies who had asked her to answer questions. She turned around and sent it to the investigator. The investigator shared it with the FBI. The FBI called us 3 to 4 days later, said, "Where did you get these answers? What is this device? Where did you get it?"
That's amazing, because I was kind of thinking like this could be used in place of remote viewing. I'm not sure if you're aware of what that is.
Absolutely, I know what remote viewing is. And we do, and our counterparts, Ron and Lourdes, do a lot of co-working with psychics, mediums, and one of two things happen. If the medium or psychic is legit, meaning they've got the abilities they claim they have, Staticom and the psychic will mesh very well. Psychic will say something, Staticom will finish the information, and vice versa. If the psychic or medium does not have the abilities that they say they have, Staticom will literally call them out. We've had Staticom say in front of a medium, "She has no abilities," which is kind of embarrassing.
Wow.
We don't control what's said. So it is what it is. Let me tell you a story.
Okay.
So when we do TDSI, or the Digital Seance Initiative, we have groups of public that come to hear it, ask their own questions, and figure out to get their own answers. Well, we had a gentleman that, I don't know if he was being sincere, I don't know if he was trying to trick it to see what would happen, but he came up, he asked Staticom a question in a Native American language, which no one else in the room knew. We didn't know, had no idea what he asked. He got his response in his Native American language, and he was blown away. That's happened with Turkish, Italian, Native American, Spanish, Tagalog, and Japanese.
Have you ever asked Staticom about extraterrestrials or angels? And not only if they exist, but if you can communicate with an angel or an extraterrestrial?
Yeah, actually, I sure have. In fact, it's on our YouTube channel, that exact clip. It's called Extraterrestrial. I was having a conversation with Spirit, and they kept saying, "We're spirits, we're spirits." And I said, "I know you're spirits." And then that question popped in my head. I said, "Well, if I can speak to spirits, can I speak with extraterrestrials?" And they answered clearly, intelligently, yes. Yes, you can.
Well, they're telling you you can, but do you know if you've ever actually talked to one?
No. The reason being I don't know that is, how would I know? The limitations of the human body are to the five senses. If I can't hear spirits speak on their own, I probably can't hear extraterrestrials speak on their own. But if you watch any interview of somebody who's interacted with extraterrestrials, they say, "I could hear them speak, but I never saw their mouth move," which means whatever method they're using to get that communication over is probably similar to what spirits are doing to get it to Staticom. So would I know if I'm who I'm speaking to unless I ask, and whether I'm told the truth or not? But Spirit said it could be done. We don't like to go down paths that we can't test that we can't verify. So we stay away from kind of the extraterrestrial stuff. I did ask that question. They said we could. Is it a possibility with the way Staticom works? Yeah, it is. I mean, we've been asked, can we communicate with Bigfoot? Can you bring this out to the woods during our investigation and see if we get communication? We haven't done that yet. But is it possibly possible? Yeah, it is possible.
Have you ever asked Staticom or asked a being, if you're right here next to us, can you make something move here in my room?
You know, I don't. Well, Ron and Lourdes might. I can't verify that without speaking to them. I have never asked them to move something. Why have I not asked? Well, because people always ask us, have you asked how the pyramids were built? Did you ask if Atlantis was existed? Did you? And there are hundreds of thousands to millions of questions to be asked. There's 4 of us that do this research. We just don't have the manpower to ask them all. At some point, will that question come up? Because is that an excellent research ability to associate both the communication that's being had with an actual physical anomaly within time and space of movement? Yes, it is. And that would be a great test. Have I done it yet, or have Ron and Lourdes? Ron and Lourdes, I thought I remember having an object move on, and I thought it was on request, but I don't want to state that without verifying for sure. But that's a good question, and one that I'll put in my top 1,000 questions to ask.
All right. Can you show us another video?
Absolutely, I can. Okay, so the next one I'm going to play was actually based on a TDSI session that we did. And one of the people in the audience, because they were communicating, spirits were communicating, they were answering questions. He wanted to know if he could communicate with spirits on his own, meaning like if we were not there, if Staticom wasn't there, could he have the ability to communicate on his own? Here is the response that he received.
One more time. Do I have permission to talk to you on my own? No, get out. Who cares? A female voice, who cares?
So again, you know, this is where somebody else is asking, and yet the answer shows up. It was timing and relevant to the question he asked. Can I speak to you on my own? No, he can't. What I can tell you, though, is that this gentleman is having unbelievable communication today. This was probably a year and a half ago, and today he is able to.
What was fascinating at the end, it said, Jim hates you. What did that mean?
Jim was there helping him that night for the presentation. So that reference is actually to somebody he knows and was there that evening.
Like one of his own friends was there with him named Jim, and that's
acquaintance.
Acquaintance.
I wouldn't necessarily acquaintance, yes.
Wow. And he basically said your friend hates you.
Correct.
And was there any ever follow up with him about that?
Oh yeah, we talked to him quite often. Matter of fact, they were over here just a week ago. We were working on another project within the paranormal. But no, I don't think that's ever been brought up.
Well, did it turn out to be true that this acquaintance?
I can't answer that.
Oh.
I would have to ask him to find out.
Oh, okay. And so
but I don't believe those two have associated since that. And that was a year ago.
But now this guy is able to contact with whoever without Staticom, right?
Well, no, he's using a version of something he built, but the communication for him is working quite well. And that brings up a very good point, is that my wife and I built spirit boxes for 12 years, and we had pretty good communication, even with the limitations of spirit boxes. When we switched over to the DRV, the spirits would communicate back and forth between Ron and Lourdes' system and Cherie and my system. Ron and Lourdes would get information about sessions we were doing, how many people were there, all this information without even talking to us. So when we'd talk on the phone or something later, he'd go, hey, you had 30 people at your event? I said, yeah, how do you know that? He goes, Staticom told us. I said, yeah, that's exactly right. Also, they would relay messages back and forth about things that were occurring or information we were doing or they were doing. I have a clip somewhere where I said, hey, is Ron and Lourdes running Staticom? Yes, they are. If they're running it right now, can you tell them Tony says hi? Yes, we can. And then he got the message. Tony says hi.
Can you show us another clip?
Absolutely. Okay, so here's kind of an example of how spirit voice can come through and be heard through Staticom without even them being at the location. Now, in this example, Ron and Lourdes are in what's called the house in between. It's a haunted location that they took Staticom to. This might even have been DRV at this time. I don't remember. But anyway, so they're in Missouri. Cherie and I are hooked up to them via video conferencing, kind of like we're doing now. And our friend Chris Allgood is there as well. They are asking questions. We are hearing the responses coming through Staticom, but they knew we connected and they asked for my wife and my help, and you will hear that. So here comes that clip. Starts with Chris. Now you can see my wife's expression because she heard it in real time, because she's like, you know, like, and then looking at me like, did you hear that? I didn't. Heard it on the recording, but I didn't hear it live. But clearly they were asking. Now who they were asking us to save, I don't know. But you know, somebody's last name coming through a device that can't pick up radio, no communication whatsoever, coming out of pure white noise that clearly says save her Rathmans.
Have you ever asked, what are you doing on the other side?
We have asked that. We have asked, what do they do? And those answers are strange. Same thing when we said, what is life like where you're at? The answer came back, and this Ron and Lourdes captured this. They came back and said it's complicated. We've heard them say things like, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I'm hungry. That seems strange to me.
Yeah.
If you don't have a physical body, could you be tired if your energy and that energy is waning or draining? Yeah, you could. But how would you be thirsty? I don't know. We don't have those answers.
Maybe they're wishing that they could reincarnate because they're missing drinking things or missing eating things.
We've asked that question too. What do you miss most? Family. Drinking is always on the top of the list. They've replied smoking. And then the other one, I don't know if I should even say, but there was another activity that humans do that they said they missed.
What about heaven? Have you asked about that?
We have. We've asked them where they are. The answers come back, you wouldn't understand. I would say, are you in heaven? Is there a hell? They don't answer that. We believe that, and this is where what we do and what we research conflicts with religion. Religion, I don't care what religion, says there's an ideal place to go, heaven, and a not so ideal place to go if you're being punished, hell. And those are sort of set in religion boundaries as locations. Do we believe that those locations exist as stated? No, we don't. You can be in hell anywhere. It's based on what you're going through, what you're experiencing, what emotions are being pulled at, and you can be in heaven anywhere. Heaven and hell could be right here, which is why we believe they are around us 24/7 and in quantities far beyond what we think are there. In fact, I don't know if I have the clip. I mean, I know I have it. I don't know if I have it keyed up. But I asked how many spirits I was communicating with, and I don't have it up. Shoot. They told me 300. And I said, 300? Did you say 300? And he replied to me and said, what? Is that the wrong answer? Like intelligently being sarcastic back. Like, how would you know? You asked me, I answered you. Now you're questioning me. It's an amazing clip.
I don't know if you've asked this or not, but it'd be interesting to, if you could ask, is our reality like a computer simulation?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer that. This is based on information given, and this is based on the Staticom project's team, what we believe reality is. We are placed in the human body, and people always ask us, what's the veil between the living and the dead? That veil is the human body. Sight is limited to visual light. Hearing is limited to certain frequencies. There is so much beyond what the human body can detect, and they are outside of that detection. So the veil, technically separating us, is our own human body, our own senses. Now, people with psychic abilities may be able to draw in more than that. But we believe that where they are and what they're doing and how they're functioning is completely normal on a day-to-day basis. What we call abnormal or paranormal is only because materialistic science cannot study it, cannot pull it apart, and cannot distinguish what it is. But science was never determined to tell you what something is. What science does is it measures, it pulls apart, it breaks down, and it predicts future behavior of that object in certain situations. Science was never determined to tell you what something is. Analytic idealism says that consciousness exists. It's always there. It's always been there. It'll always continue to be there. Universal consciousness holds all the information that individual consciousness transports back to it. That information is available to any spirit not in the human body. When in the human body, we are separated from that, because what would we learn if we had access to everything already known? That is also part of the universal laws that we've spoken about. But that whole theory becomes, and it clashes with science, and it clashes with certain parts of religion. Religion says, hey, you shouldn't be speaking to spirits, you're speaking to demons, they're unclean, they're gonna, that's never happened in 14 years that we're aware of. But now time does not exist either for them. Does it matter whether it's a day, a month, or 14 years? No, it's irrelevant to them because time doesn't exist. So could they come and punish us 20 years later? Maybe, if that's truly the case and whether that truly exists. But not, again, not knowing the variables under which they exist, understanding how those variables line up, it's really difficult for us to answer those questions outside of putting the information into material we can understand, decipher, and restudy. Staticom does that. It creates what's called a PPO, or permanent paranormal object. We're getting voices from nowhere, but those voices can be replayed. They can be replayed for anybody. They can be studied. They can be analyzed. It creates a permanent paranormal object that can then be studied.
Have you ever asked for personal advice?
I have. Some they'll answer. We try to push the boundaries. We try to push those universal boundaries all the time. Sometimes we'll get very generic answers like, always be kind. You know, you're all the same. Treat each other the same, things like that. Other times they'll say, we can't answer that. Sorry, not talking. Don't answer them. Depends on what's asked.
That's amazing that they're telling each other, don't answer him.
Well, we did questions based on the Order of the Knights Templar. And I was asking some pretty personal questions. And they would flat out and say that. Can't answer that, that's personal, or we can't reveal that. Other times someone else would answer it. And then you'd hear somebody say, why'd you tell him that, you idiot?
Have you ever asked, why do we come to Earth as humans?
I don't know if I've asked that exact question, and that would be another good one to ask. But what we understand by what they're saying, and what they're saying about not being able to answer questions to interrupt the life that we're here to live and to learn from, that to me translates to the answer of what we're here from. We're here for the individual departed consciousness to learn, to grow, to evolve, and then to return to the universal consciousness with additional growth. That to me then translates to the purpose of life.
Have you ever asked about God or any religious figure?
Yeah, funny you say that too. It was about maybe 3 or 4 days before Easter. I was running a Staticom question or session, and I asked, what religious holiday is coming up? They said, Easter. I said, yes, correct, Easter. Then somebody said, that's Jesus. I said, yes, you're correct. That is Jesus. What did Jesus do on that day? They answered, he rose. Then my wife said, he rose from what? They said, death. And I thought, oh my God, that's pretty cut and dry. Then I said, have you seen Jesus? And the answer came back from a very adult sounding woman, I have not. And then this little girl voice came in right after her and said, where is he? Where is he? And that's when they stopped talking. But that's about as close as I got to that particular question.
So what are the next steps for Staticom?
Wow. We are constantly, like you asked before, working on improving the clarity of the voice. And that's difficult because, like I said, we don't know the variables. We don't know where it's coming from. It makes us difficult to determine what needs to be done in order to clarify it. Is it a power ratio? Is it something within the amplification of the speech over the white noise? Is it a filtration system? Is it something within denoising? Is it? So we test every single day. We add new features, we take features out, we try to figure out where improvements seem to be happening and move those on. The other thing we don't know is we don't know the limitations of Staticom. Over the last couple of years, we've probably only scratched the surface of what might be possible from it. So therefore, in order to determine what next steps are, we have to also determine where does it stop, what's the limitation, and how far can we push those. Obviously, the be-all, end-all end product for it was what Thomas Edison claimed about hoping to develop back in the late 30s, early 40s, which he called the phone to the dead. We believe Staticom is the closest methodology today that's ever existed to Thomas Edison's phone to the dead. But being able to communicate and get answers from something from the other side, or whatever terminology you want to call it, has been phenomenal. But you know what? The number one enjoyment out of Staticom that came that we never truly expected was that when we take this to individual homes or Staticom sessions or even investigations, and someone asks a question, and when they get the response, you see their mouth just drop, their eyes pancake size, they're overwhelmed with emotion because they heard from a past family member or someone that they lost. They got some piece of information they wouldn't have gotten before. And the unbelievable sense of peace and enjoyment that gave them is by far the top reality of what Staticom can bring to humanity, that we never saw that coming. And it is the best form of appreciation.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yeah. The one thing I want to say is Staticom is not available yet. The reason we haven't released it to the public, and we plan to, but there are 4 researchers. This was designed purely out of research, not to grow paranormal technology. We've never, even in 12 years of building spirit boxes, I never sold a single one. They weren't designed for that. But We know the interest from the paranormal community and even people outside of the paranormal community to get to use it. Will we put together some sort of diagram of what pieces are needed, how it's configured, settings, stuff like that? Probably. When that's going to happen, I can't answer. But we produced a 3-part docuseries called Knowingly Talking to the Unknown, which is on Paraflix. And just last night, we released it free. And Paraflix has it up. It's available. You can download the Paraflix app. You can watch all 3 parts. It's over 3 hours long, but it gives you every aspect of how this functions. We can be reached on Facebook. I'm Tony Rathman, Ron Iacovetti, Lourdes Gonzalez, Cherie Rathman. We have an Entity Voices.com website. They can reach us there. You can email us from there. Gonyak Paranormal is our counterparts website. They can find out more on Staticom. We have a Staticom YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, just put in Staticom. It'll bring up, I don't know how many hundreds of clips of evidence of Staticom.
Tony, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Never stick with what you're told is the truth. Challenge it, push the boundaries of it, determine for yourself whether you believe what is happening is true, is accurate, and if it doesn't seem that way to you, research. Find out what else could be occurring. That is how Staticom was developed. That is how you learn in life. That is how you don't go down a dark hole based off of what someone else told you. Challenge everything. That's my advice.
Tony, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.